Hello, everyone, and welcome to the New Earth Lawyer podcast. My name is Geraldine Jones-Putra. I'm a lawyer based in Melbourne, Australia. I'm speaking to you from Boonwurrung country, and so I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Today, I'm speaking to Rhiannon Thomas. Rhiannon comes to us from Cape Town, South Africa. She has 2 decades of legal experience. She's an attorney, notary, conveyancer, and administrator of deceased estates at a practice in Cape Town. She's also a values consultant and an accredited contracts provider and trainer. Rhiannon founded Milkwood in 2012. Her mission was to bring a more expansive, personal, and meaningful approach to anti-nuptial contracts, cohabitation agreements, and wills through interdisciplinary collaboration, which means that she works with other professionals to offer a wider range of services. Rhiannon says she has found her tribe in the integrative law movement, which I have spoken about on this podcast before. So, without further ado, Rhiannon, I think we'll get into it and welcome you to this show and hear all about the myriad of things that you do as a practitioner and a consultant.
Thanks, Geraldine. It's really lovely to be here, and I'm very honoured to have been asked to participate in your podcast of New Earth Lawyers, and inspired by the other people that you have spoken to. So thank you for having me here.
We have a great range of people on this podcast, but they do have a few things in common, right? Which is the first thing in common is that they really do things differently from the norm or what we've been trained as lawyers to do. So, let's start there for you. At what point did you decide that you were going to do things differently as a lawyer?
So I think the decision to do things differently just generally came about very early in my childhood, when I had the opportunity to travel with my parents when I was 8, turning 9, and coming out of apartheid South Africa, where there was a very particular way of life and way of living, which I just accepted as that is how the world is, and didn't really question it a lot. Mm-hmm. And then through traveling to other countries, got to see people living in such different ways and in harmony with multiracial communities. And I think the racial differences were so stark to me coming out of South Africa as a white South African, and just seeing people of color and other ethnicities doing jobs that in South Africa were reserved for white people, and white people doing jobs that were reserved for non-white people. And that made me really question the narrative of the society in which I was living and growing up, and that actually it was all a story that we were being told, rather than fact or truth or reality. And so very early on, I started to question how systems work, what underpins them, and why people are doing the things they do. So fast forward to law school, and I arrived at law school very, very socially minded, wanting to make a difference in society, help people find justice, all those very laudable principles, and then realized that law school was nothing like that. And actually it was all about becoming part of the system. And that in fact our training was to turn us into a sausage at the end of the sausage machine and become either an attorney or an advocate or something and prop up the system. And so I went through law school and I went into the system. And in South Africa, we have to do a training for 2 years in order to become an attorney. It's called Articles of Clerkship. And so off I went to a medium-sized law firm, which was quite traditional, And yeah, it was quite an eye-opener to see what being a lawyer was meant to be. And it just didn't sit very well with me. And so I started to feel very fraudulent and very divided in my own identity. So I felt like every morning I was getting dressed up to go and act in a play about being a lawyer. And it wasn't me at all, and it didn't reflect my personality and my values and those kinds of things. And in fact, during that time, I had a breakdown in that I got to work one day and I actually couldn't get out of my car because I just couldn't do another day of being not me.
Yeah.
And it really hit me then. So, and then I thought, well, what do you do if this is the system and you just don't fit in and people think you're a bit weird and different? And so the thought was, well, I could leave, which I think a lot of people do, or I can try some other aspects of the system. And so I did do that, and I went in to work at the university and tried to craft something there. But that's another system of also, a particular way of being. And I'm a doer. I like to be out in the world, meeting people and doing things. And academia felt a little bit too much like a cut off from people, except for the teaching, which I absolutely loved, and inspiring law students to sort of be themselves rather than to kind of, totally throw themselves into this machine.
Yeah.
And yeah, so then I set up my own practice, and that was before Milkwood. That my vision at that stage was to be a different kind of lawyer and make people feel comfortable and accepted and not intimidated by the legal system. And then I suppose as time has passed and I've found more courage to step out and be very different, that's come over time. As I found the integrative law movement actually and realized, oh, I'm not the only one. There are other people out there, and actually I'm not weird. They're all weird. So I think that's the journey.
Yeah, it's one that I've heard a few times, and really I resonate with that as well. I was going to, before you brought up the word courage, I was going to ask you about that, because when we tell these narratives over a few years of how we went from being a certain kind of lawyer to realizing that we didn't want to just fall into the system, etc., we just tell it like it happened quite naturally. But just like that incident you related when you were in the car and you just couldn't move because like something in you had broken down, there are many moments that I think happen to people like us who just can't work in the system anymore because there's too much dissonance, and it's not easy. And so I actually wanted to bring that out. Like you needed to build up that courage. It came through many, many moments of saying, yes, no, I will do it differently.
Yeah, and there were other moments, of course, and some of them were being exposed to a course that was run by the health science faculty, where they were teaching empathy and compassion to health science students. And a light bulb went on, and I realized, well, you can actually learn empathy. Imagine if lawyers were taught how to be more empathic and how to have better social skills and things like that. So that was a light bulb moment for me, and that I could learn those skills. And then, through some experiences of very close friends and the loss of a very, very close friend who was, I call her a soul sister. I also realized that certain areas of the law, like wills particularly, are so dry and formulaic that they actually don't allow a person to really engage with the elephant in the room, which is death. And then my own experiences of loss and feeling, hitting rock bottom and wondering what is my purpose and what is my role. And I think the biggest thing for me was that I decided to stay in law. And
yeah.
some progressively change it from the inside. So I feel a little bit subversive in the things that I do.
And that's a journey too, as to starting to realize where you might place yourself best to make those changes. So I tried it from within a large law firm. It was very hard. There was a journey there, and now I'm trying it from outside in my own practice, like you also. I find it's actually easier on my own and just being able to make an impact. But it comes with a lot of learning throughout a lot of experiences. I'm glad you touched on the wills, because I wanted to ask you about that. I've spoken to many people, many lawyers on this show, about different practices that make up the integrative law movement. And I've spoken to collaborative family practitioners. I've spoken to people who are mediating disputes in a very novel way. I have spoken to Kim Wright on conscious contracts. And I really wanted to hear from you about the wills and estates, like how you do that differently.
So initially, that also came out of a story and an experience where I drafted a will for a friend of mine who was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And he phoned me up and he said, Rhiannon, I'm going to die and I need you to come and do a will for me. And it was quite a shock, actually. And I've been doing wills for a long time, to have someone who said that, because most people, when they came to do their will, talked about their death as if it was some sort of future event that might happen. And then in my own life, I've experienced quite a lot of death and loss. And part of that was this learning that the will wasn't really much, actually, in that everything that you lose so much. You lose the person and their stories, and those are the things that you miss, rather than the money that you get or the one item, and you're not sure why they left you that particular item, maybe without a story to it or something like that. So then and then in that very same space of time, it was in a period of a month, another friend was diagnosed with cancer, and that wasn't actually was in denial, to be frank about it, and didn't think that she was going to die, but still, because she was a conscientious person, felt that she should do her will and do some planning and that kind of thing. And doing those two wills, I realized how poorly equipped I was with my own skills to assist them properly, to have proper conversations about what they actually wanted to happen after they died. And so I thought, this was an opportunity for these two people who weren't old to do something more, for the loved ones and the ones they've left behind, and also for just to find out information. So to ask hard questions that assume that the person that you're talking to, who's alive and there with you, isn't going to be there with you in a few months' time. And it was really hugely emotive for me. And so I reached out to somebody who was more comfortable in that death space, who worked with people who were in the process of dying, assisting them to die in a way that was right for them and their family. And so approached her and said, would you work with me on wills so that we can have those difficult conversations, so that I can get the information that I need. And we can also offer them the opportunity to do something more than just the legal document. We've got them, and they're there because they know they have to do their will. It's something you have to do. But then we could offer them this opportunity to do something more meaningful for their family, like some legacy work, or to write letters, or those kinds of things. And so that's the service that I offer at the moment, and it's particularly aimed at people who have the knowledge, in a way, that they're going to die, to feel comfortable in a safe space where they can actually speak about their fears and their hopes for the future when they aren't in it.
Oh, that's quite remarkable. And we were talking about this before we started recording. You do that through Milkwood, which is this multidisciplinary practice where you have the other professionals, the care workers, psychologists, and so on. And you couldn't do that. You couldn't run that practice as a law firm in South Africa.
No. So how our rules for practice work is that if you are an attorney, you have to work only with other attorneys.
Yeah.
In fact, you're not really even supposed to share office space with someone who isn't an attorney. So to get around that, the idea of Milkwood was created, which isn't a law firm, but is a consultancy or collaboration between other professionals. And so in that way, I could still do the legal work and then also work together with generally a mental health professional. So our sessions are collaborative sessions, a bit like collaborative law, in that with the client, there'll be myself and my colleague, and the person who does the wills with me is Diane Berger, and then the client and their spouse or family. We can be very flexible about who comes along, and then she helps to hold the space, to create a safe space, and it helps me as well because I feel held. And the traditional way of doing it is just somebody contacts you for a will and you send them your form and it says, well, what's your name and where do you live and what assets do you have and those kind of things. So we also ask some other questions. So in all my Milkwood wills, I have a getting to know you form, which doesn't ask any questions about assets or things like that. And we've come up with 5 questions that help us to get to know the client and also allow the client to reflect on what it is that they need from the process. And
so you separately practice as an attorney with a law practice in Cape Town, and then you're running basically two jobs side by side.
Yes,
and
pretty much.
Milkwood also does these antenuptial contracts. I'm very interested in those. So you're doing wills and deceased estates, plus you're working with couples.
Yes. So those 2 documents are quite connected in that when people get married, often they have to change their will. And in South Africa, only a notary can draft an antenuptial contract and sign it off. So that's one of my additional qualifications, is that I'm a notary. But how the system in South Africa works is that our default matrimonial property system is in community of property. So you share everything with your spouse. And although it has a lot of advantages for people who might not have a lot of assets because they then have to share everything, as soon as people start acquiring assets and sort of building up their estates, it can become a difficult regime. The difficult thing about the antenuptial contract, it's also called a prenup in the US, is that it has to be agreed and signed before you get married. So you have to have a conversation before you get married about how your estate will be regulated by the law in the future. And what was happening is I was doing those in my law firm and realizing that the couples who were coming to have these conversations had all sorts of issues around money and the story of money and their family of origin. Some of them had come out of families where there'd been horrible divorces, and now they have to, start talking about how they're going to share things with their spouse. However, they're in a good space because they're about to get married. So it seemed like the perfect opportunity to actually have a deeper conversation around how things would work in the marriage. Whereas the antenuptial contract focuses only on 2 points: the point from the start at the start of the marriage and at the end of the marriage. So that's all that it focuses on: what will happen at the beginning and what will happen at the end. And I was like, well, there could be, there are years and years in between that. And actually, many relationships, in my experience of doing some family law, which I moved away from because I found it so emotionally stressful. But my experience had been that money can be the reason, one of the major reasons why relationships end, because the necessary conversations aren't had and people aren't on the same page and that kind of thing. So it felt like this was a perfect opportunity to say to a couple, why don't we go a little bit deeper and look at your values and your hopes for your future relationship, your story of your family of origin, what your vision is for your marriage or your relationship, civil union or whatever kind of partnership they were entering into, and then look a bit more deeply. And again, realizing, well, I didn't actually have those skills. And I'm a big fan of therapy. I've been in therapy for many years and I love it. And it's helped me to grow and develop as a person. And so thought, that's the person that I need, the person who can talk about the feelings in a way that's helpful and non, sort of helpful, and can actually get the couple to really engage. And so that was the idea then, okay, I'm going to collaborate with a psychologist. At the moment, so initially it was with a psychologist who worked with couples, and she's very busy in her practice. So the person that I work with now is a social worker who works with couples. And we have such fun actually with the couples. It's really, really lovely.
I'm sure. So are people coming to you because they know you offer this kind of service? Or are they coming to you expecting just to do a will or an antenuptial, and then they find out that you are much more?
No, I don't do that.
You don't surprise them and say, we're going to talk about your feelings today. You thought this was about your antenuptial.
Yeah, so they come knowing that this is what they're signing up for. And we give them an info sheet, which, is very different to the standard info sheet. And most of them, so it's been interesting because initially the clients were very particular kind of client. Most people who had either had come out of a marriage and were entering into a second one, or a lot of same-sex couples, because I feel that they've had to do a bit more emotional work around being a couple and living in a world that is very heteronormative. And so they were very open to doing things differently. But over the last 5 years, as younger people who are, I'm just a great fan of young people who are, know about values and know about sort of having a vision, and who really want to create something positive. There's been a lot more of that, but it is all word of mouth, or me talking to someone or saying, you could do it a bit differently, and then coming that way. Yeah, but I think people don't actually know that it's an option, and a lot of the time, and that's what I'm trying to do at the moment with Milkwood, with my blog and social media, is to try and educate people that there is another way, and it can actually be really beneficial.
So if we take you back to that law student and showed you the vision of what you are today and the kind of work you are today, what would you have thought as the law student?
That's a great question. I think I would have felt that because I felt like I shouldn't really be a lawyer. I always felt a bit of a fraud. And some people couldn't believe I was a lawyer. They were determined to call me an architect. I'm not, when they met, they couldn't remember. They said, aren't you an architect? I was like, no, I'm a lawyer. Maybe architects are more different in arty or something. And they'd be, oh yes, I forgot. it's almost like they couldn't compute that. And so I did feel in law school, I loved the intellectual rigor and I loved all that stuff, but I didn't feel like there was a place for me. And I think if someone had come to me then and shown me what I'm doing now, I think I would have felt more comfortable in myself, and could do something that would feel authentic. But it's an interesting question because, of course, all the experiences over time and that feeling of not belonging and not really fitting in are part of the reason why I do what I do today. So, yeah, it's a great question.
That path, finding the way, the next step. Well, what's the next step? Sometimes you turn a hard left and you come back and so on. I've done plenty of those.
Well.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Tell us about the integrative law movement. You mentioned how that really helped you feel more like a lawyer and more like you'd found your tribe.
So up until I heard about the integrative law movement, I felt like I was very alone in what I was doing, and people thought I was a bit weird, and I felt quite judged by colleagues. They didn't really get what I was doing, and so I felt quite alone and a bit of an outlier. But I had an inner conviction that I wanted to align my work with my values because I couldn't live feeling like two different people. So for me, that sort of feeling of being in alignment was a really strong. And then in 2012 was a hugely pivotal year in my life. And in 2012, another lawyer here in Cape Town, Amanda, who you've have spoken to, Amanda Lamont,
yes,
contacted me, and she said, I've been trying to find a lawyer who's done a Women Within, which is a sort of women's personal development course. And you're the only person that I can find. And I'd love to chat to you about like you sort of integrating personal development into legal practice. And so I met with her, and she'd been feeling very similar in her journey, but had done a lot more sort of looking around and had found that there were these other people, and had found Kim Wright. And she said, I'm going to bring Kim to South Africa, and I'm going to hold a conference. And as Amanda does, she just decides she's going to do this huge thing, and then she does it and pulls it off. It's quite phenomenal. And so she did do that and gathered all these lawyers who came to meet Kim and hear what she had to say. And on the day that Kim arrived in Cape Town, Amanda was unable to fetch her from the airport. So she sent me off I volunteered to go and fetch Kim. So I was feeling quite intimidated. And anyway, off I went to the airport to go and fetch her in my very old car. I was like, she's going to think what's she going to think? I've got this terrible car. And anyway, I found Kim, and she got in the car, and we loaded all her luggage into my tiny little car. And we had some time to kill, so we went for a coffee. And it was like coming home, talking to her. And we connected so wonderfully, and she has that wonderful nurturing energy of sort of, I feel like, that mother energy. And she just said to me, but what you've been doing, the last few years, it has a name. It's called integrative law. And there are other people who do it. And here's a whole book called Lawyers as Peacemakers that I've written about this area of law. And, you could be in this book, kind of thing. And it gives me shivers talking about it. It was the most wonderful thing. And meeting Kim made me realize I wasn't alone. And then it also gave me even more courage to say, you know what, I'm actually doing something that's valuable and good for me. It's good for clients. It's good for the planet. It builds better relationships. It makes people happier. And then from then on, I kind of sailed. And conscious contracting had always been, using values and using vision had been something that I had been using in my work. So to find that, and then I had a call with Linda Alvarez, or now Alana, And it was another coming home moment. She was busy writing her book, Discovering Agreement, and we chatted about that. And I was like, these are my people. These are my lawyers. Yeah.
I know. When I met you, it was on a trip to the UK when you were living there. And I met Patrick Andrews on that same trip, and I've had him on this show. And I met a few other people who were connected to the B Corporation movement. And I remember that trip, and it was a very similar thing. It was this realization that there was a whole world that was opening up to me. And Kim, of course, had made the introduction to you and to Patrick. This whole world opening up to me that was kind of in color as opposed to the black and white that I'd been existing in. And it was like, oh my goodness, I can exist and thrive, be myself, and grow, develop this incredible path and purpose here. Yeah,
absolutely. And it is a development, and it is a growth. Yesterday, for the very first time, I went for a walk with my client. Inspired by Patrick, who takes his clients on walks because he lives in the forest, and it's beautiful there.
yeah.
So my client arrived and I said, "Are you up for us walking rather than sitting in my office?" And she was like, "Yes, absolutely." And so off we went, and we spent an hour walking and sitting and walking and talking. And so I did something brand new yesterday. And I think that's part of being an integrative lawyer, is just continuously being open to doing things a little bit differently. And she actually said, "I'm not surprised you're going for a walk. I know you're not the usual kind of lawyer."
That's a compliment.
And it was a wonderful way to have a consultation. We just went to the park. There's a local park, and we looked at the flowers, and we saw the dogs, and it was lovely. And it was a very emotive conversation because she was coming to talk to me about things in her family, and she's had a lot of loss and death. And so it was so beautiful to be in this natural space to just be mindful of the world around us and nature. And
So what do you see coming up for yourself with Milkwood?
So my vision is really is twofold in a way. On one side, it's to offer services to people that are different and based on integrative law. And then the other side is to inspire other lawyers to start changing their practice, because it's so beneficial for oneself. Your life changes when you start building alignment between who you are and what you do and the kind of service that you offer. And so that's really is my big vision, is to bring about some change within the legal system by inspiring lawyers to do things a bit more differently. And I hope that is where I'm headed with my clients, because I feel like I learn, as I said, I learn every day from them and from the processes we do. And just yesterday, going walking, that was just such a great experience. So I think that's where I'm going. Hopefully it'll all open up to that.
I'm sure it'll unfold perfectly. Rhiannon, thank you for being on the show. Thank you so much. It's been amazing chatting to you and catching up with you again and hearing all that you've been doing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a real privilege to be here, and also it's so lovely to see you, from the person that I met in Oxford to this. We were glowing then, but you're now glowing and radiant, and just you look so at peace, and it's lovely to see that, and I honor your journey as well.
Thank you.